things set up. Good afternoon, everyone. What a fantastic conference. I've enjoyed all the speakers enormously. Quite a few conferences I go to, and I go to a lot. There's always, a fair percentage of the speakers who are relevant to my interests, and then a few you think, yeah, maybe I'll just slip out and get a cup of coffee or something. Today, every single speaker has been inspirational, has been right on topic, and oh look, yeah, there you go, mic's working now, and really, really interesting presentations. So, just a little bit about myself, because obviously I haven't given a presentation today. I'm the digital imaging advisor for JISC Digital Media. So my remit is to guide, advise, and train people working within FE and HE in all matters relating to digital imaging, digitisation, and 3D imaging. We're going to run a Q&A session now. Hopefully you've got lots of questions, and just in case you haven't, I've got all your post-it notes that you stuck up on the board at lunchtime. So if I could ask my colleagues to come and sit with me, because I'm feeling a little bit lonely. I think you know all these people. I will introduce them when they've sat down so I get their names right. So we've just, I'm going to sit down because I'm looking far too kind of, okay. So we have Dave Thompson, who's the digital curator for the Wellcome Trust. It's quite interesting actually, some of the issues that he was discussing, Dave was discussing here. I've actually got as post-it notes. I think maybe Dave actually stuck them on here, I'm not sure. Working with digital is not a technical issue, it's a social issue. Yeah? Digitisation is not preservation, discuss. That sounds kind of right up your street there. We have Richard Everett, who is the photographic manager of the Wellcome Trust. We have Lisa Moore here, who is the digital imaging officer at UCA. And we have Geoff Laycock, who spoke at the beginning of the day, who's the director of Scan Data Experts. I have on these sheets with all your post-it notes. I have a list of topics, but I think what I'll do, I'll go through each topic one by one, and we'll look at some of the post-it notes. And if anyone has questions relating to those topics, then please feel free to pitch in with your questions. Although I'm an imaging expert, I have a pet subject of digital preservation as well. It's an issue of critical importance in the digital world, and it's one that I feel isn't readily addressed by a number of collections, archives, and so forth, as Dave was saying. It's let's put it over there, and we'll think about that later. But ultimately, if you don't, or if you're not engaging with digital preservation, we've all heard of bit rot and things like that. You can pretty much guarantee that at some level, you will eventually lose your data and your collection, and, well, what do you do after that? So, first of all, with regards to digital preservation, we have a number of, they're not so much questions, but concerns. As we said before, digitisation is not preservation. Can you expand on that, Dave, at all? There is a mic there, isn't there? Yes.
Is that on? Oh, it is. Is that on? I can't tell.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Yeah,
Right, thank
yeah.
you. Okay. I think I said it quite well in 3 lines.
No, it's on, Dave.
It's definitely on. Yeah. The issue is not that digitisation is preservation. The issue is selling the story. There are still a lot of people, a lot of organisations, a lot of senior managers who look on digitisation activities as a way of getting stuff out there on the cheap, getting stuff out there in a way that means they can put the physical material into Deep Store or wherever it is, without actually thinking through some of the issues around the need to manage both the physical thing and its digital manifestation. The line, congratulations, you just doubled your problem, it's not mine, it comes out of the Digital Preservation Coalition. And it's well said as often as is possible. Digitisation is a means of access. It's a means of getting hold of stuff. It's a means of making stuff available, not preserving it. Equally, the idea that we're going to digitise something in a kind of quick and dirty sort of way and come back and do it later when we've got more time, more resource, is equally a bit of a myth. We've just ingested our 5 millionth image. We've just digitised our 59,000th thing. The idea that we're going to go back at some point and redigitise that stuff, it ain't going to happen. It's just not true. So digitisation is actually the creation of a completely separate collection. It's related to the physical stuff that you have, but you're building something completely new. You're building a new collection, you're building new material, and this is where it starts to get really transformational. New skills required, new infrastructure is required, new management techniques are required. It's a completely different ballgame, a new activity that an institution is engaging in.
Good. Lisa, maybe you...
I was just going to say, a recent, because like I said, I work at university, we had 15,000 VHS. They're on an off-site store, they cost us, I think, something like £600 a month to store these VHS. But actually, more than half that collection is being is digitized. The BFI have a copy. Why are we? So we digitize it and put it on our streaming service, and then we discard it because it's not an archive. The BFI are taking care of that, but we just have it on our streaming service for teaching for our students. So it is, like you say, it's going back to that. Really, why are you keeping it? Why are you doing that? Yeah.
Good. Does anyone have any questions relating to this topic at all?
Yeah, the thing that worries me, and I sort of go back quite a way, as I started digitising as sort of an amateur in 1989 with a £1,000 black and white only scanner that you get for £50 now. And I remember going to some conferences way back, and one of the great examples of the digitisation project that used to be quoted, I can't remember its exact name. It was the it was the archive, the Spanish archive on their colonial empire material, thousands of documents, something was India's, I'm sure someone will know what it was, and this was one of these first great projects that was being done. I think it was mentioned on the Head site as well, way back.
Maybe,
yeah. And
maybe from before my time.
It just strikes me, looking back, there it was, the absolute, perfection then. Now that was scanned, if I remember, at 110 dots per inch. The comment just earlier on about, well, of course, we're never going to go back and digitise this stuff again. Technology moves on. Are we saying we're here now? This is it, and because they must have thought that back then. Do you see what I mean? It's just, have we now arrived? And
well, I think whether or not we've arrived, certainly technology is getting better all the time, and so the capability of it gets larger. The reason specifications generally get chosen are because of what you can ultimately do with the image, and 300 dpi, which tends to be your basic for the base level for scanning things, is because that's the level to achieve a high quality print reproduction, which is why dots per inch and pixels per inch get often interchanged with each other. And there was a lot of projects back in the early days. One of the main reasons that Heads was founded, interestingly, that were charging off, digitising like whole volumes of journals to 72 dpi, which looked great on screen, and then you're 72 or 110, but then you printed them out and they came out the size of a business card, which was not an awful lot of use for an awful lot of effort. So I think standardisation and communication's a lot better now than it ever used to be. And yes, we can now generate single shot images of 80 megapixel camera backs and so on and so forth. So things are going to keep getting better according to Moore's law, I suppose. But the access copies and the way we use those images every day, those standards are probably going to stay the same for some time now, I would suggest.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add something?
Sorry, yes, please.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think we scan in pixels per inch. We don't scan in dots per inch. So I think when we're talking about scanning or digitisation, we're talking in pixels, not dots, because a dot's round and a pixel's square. So I think it's important to know the difference there. I don't want to disagree with David completely. I was involved in a digitisation project a long time ago, which was to digitise the Wellcome images project, which was to digitise our analogue collection of negatives and transparencies. Okay, so we scoped this out back in the it would have been in the 90s now, and we completed that project back in the early 2000s, and that was the decisions we made then in terms of how we digitise things, and that was scanning. I have to say, because we were scanning film and we were scanning transparencies. The decisions that we made in terms of the sampling rate in which we scanned that stuff out was very much about the technology, the levels of technology at the time, and it was very much about the money that we had at the time to do that project. I can tell you as a fact, we are actually rescanning some of that stuff even now. However, most of it, to be honest with you, is fit for purpose. So, the decisions that we made at that time were about reproduction size, and I think the general thought was that most of the things that we use in the picture library were going to be reproduced at quarter page or less. So that was a pragmatic decision that was made at the time based on the equipment that we had, or moreover, actually, the funding that we had to do it. So we are actually scanning or redigitising some of that stuff. I'm actually trying to go a different way and actually re-photograph the original items, which is a much better way of doing it rather than re-scan a surrogate of that item. But obviously that has particular issues in itself, i.e. some of those things are actually different now than they were then, or we may not have access to them. So it's a complicated question, that one, I have to say. No simple answer there.
It's interesting because this is a conversation I have quite a lot as well. What is fit for purpose? What is best practice? And I would add the caveat that those two terms are relative. What is fit for purpose and considered best practice for large institutions will not necessarily be the same as for a local history group, for example, who have very limited resources but have a very interesting to them collection that they want to make available online. If they only have a cheap scanner or a cheap camera, well, that's fit for purpose because that's all they've got. Yeah, and it's much better to get those assets online, disseminated, shared, than just say, oh, we haven't got the money to buy the kit, let's forget about it. On a similar note, moving on to my next sheet, technical processes, the overriding question here is to do with asset management systems. Cataloguing systems. Yeah, cataloguing systems for small organisations, which database to use, issues with DAM systems, means our online project has not yet put anything online. All I would say, being a representative of JISC, is keep it open source. Over to you, Geoff.
Yeah, open source is definitely a good option. It's a difficult one, of course. I'm basically going to do the politicians thing now. It's the season for it, isn't it? It is difficult because it depends on practicality and it depends on cost. There's all sorts of different ways you can go. There are digital asset management systems, and call them what you like, enterprise content management systems, all sorts that you can go out there and spend any amount of money you like if you want to. Plenty of people lining up to take your money off you. But the reality is that you have to go for things which are fit for purpose. And I don't know if you remember back to the talk that I did this morning. We had a problem because the main organisation that we commissioned to build a database actually went out of business halfway through building the project. After I recovered from the nervous breakdown, it was we actually did it. What was, I could only think was the most practical thing to do, which is to take on one of the programmers who've now found themselves out of a job, and put them on the payroll and get that person to build the system from scratch in open source technology. It's the only thing I could think of to do. I think there's a lot more range of systems out there at the moment, and if you can tie it into something you're already using to manage your collection, then that's quite a good thing. And there's also, I'm dealing with the Postal Museum at the moment, they, I think, have Calm as their system, but what they've done is that to put their collection online, they've got a third-party piece of software, of which, helpfully, the name escapes me, but they've got a third-party piece of software that's actually mining the data out of their Calm system and making it available online. So it provides effectively an extra security layer there. So I think you have to do your research, and I think reaching out to other colleagues and looking at what other people are doing and getting feedback, because people will be brutally honest about what the pros and cons are, and then try and find a solution that fits the budget is probably the best thing to do.
Speaking of being brutally honest, and at the risk of falling out with JISC, open source is fine. There's nothing wrong with open source tools. There is one major caveat with open source. If you go with an open source tool and you develop it yourself, you're the only people on the planet who are using it. You've got a bespoke system. You can't share any of the components with anybody else. You can't take components other people have developed. You have to pay a developer to make all the blue buttons green. Everything you want to do, you have to pay for. So the initial cost, the cost of acquisition for open source software is very, very low. But just be aware that the long-term cost of ownership can be extraordinarily high and can, in some cases, be prohibitive.
There are some very good tools online that you can use to make comparisons of various dam systems. I know the DPC have a comparison page on their website looking at dam systems. Also, Copter and Power as well. Got some very good resources on there comparing dam systems. Everywhere I go, most of the larger institutions I speak to with regards to dam systems and workflow, the word I keep hearing is Gooby. There you go. Good, thank you very much. I know we're a bit pushed for time, so I'm going to skip a couple and see if we can come back to them. There's one here I specifically wanted to touch on. Where are we? Collaboration. That's a kind of word that we've been hearing quite a lot today. Again, a kind of a feeling that I get talking to different collections, archives, libraries, is that there are an awful lot of questions being repeatedly asked by these disparate groups. And all these people asking the same questions, addressing the same issues, and making the same mistakes as well. And it strikes me that there's, as much as I as an individual have been accused of silo working occasionally, I think I could possibly lay that at the feet of some institutions, that they're quite keen at silo working. We know what we're doing, we're going to do it our way. When in fact it's so much easier just to pick up the phone and phone up the Wellcome Trust and say, "Hey Dave, how do I do this? You know, it's all gone horribly wrong." Sorry, Dave.
RTFM.
as has already been suggested, people are very happy to talk about their projects. And whatever project you're working on, you can pretty much safe to say you will find another project that has been run already, that runs on pretty much the same lines and have had the same issues, the same problems, and they've found answers that would be applicable to your particular predicament. So in that sense, collaboration, all the way along. If you've got a problem, pick up the phone, email someone. There are plenty of channels of communication. There's the JISC mail list servers, email addresses on websites, everything. I'd like to put this to Lisa, please.
Yeah,
collaboration.
I'm part of CopySeek, and I'm always terrified whenever I press the send button, because that I'll appear stupid, that this is just a really obvious question. And I'm always just gratified when people come back and say, yeah, no, I've also got this problem. Maybe there's somebody out there who's experienced the same. And there is, mailing lists, I think, you just got to be brave, put it out there, and, you will find there's somebody else who wants to know exactly the same thing. And often I go back to those people. We'll kind of email each other 3 months later and say, so how did you get on, and things like that. So mailing lists and just putting yourself out there, I definitely recommend.
And there's no such thing as a stupid question either.
It really is worth promoting the work that you do, because that's a way of advertising what you're up to. It's a way of passively seeking assistance. People know what you're up to, people know what you're doing, people will come back to you. People will just ask questions anyway. You'll get tweets back, you'll get Facebook comments. Even if you just start getting likes, you're starting to make connections. If we're working on digital projects, born digital material, digitized material, it's becoming more important that we make part of that work sharing what we're doing, documenting the stories, documenting what we did, and then sharing that stuff afterwards. We're lucky in the Wellcome Library in that a lot of my time is spent doing things like this. I can tweet about the collections, I tweet about what we're doing. We spend a lot of time opening our doors. The last 2 years we've had our Digitisation Open Days, where anybody can come in and just find out what we've been doing with digitisation. They get a tour of the studio with Richard's people. They get to hear how we create the images in the first place, where we store them, what we do with Gooby. Yes, we're Gooby users, big Gooby promoters as well. Sharing really is learning. And increasingly, it's beholding on all of us to spend more of our time doing that. Sharing, finding out what other people are doing, reaching out to other people, because fundamentally, the problems are all the same. Nobody's facing anything that's different.
Yeah, I think singly the best thing I probably ever did at Wellcome in the 22 years I've been here was probably joining the Library and Archives Imaging Group, which I'm now fortunate enough to chair. And as much of that is about peer review of what you do. So I'm going to make a decision on something about how we do something. Just to have that support network and actually have that as a way of then lobbying my senior management team to do something has been really useful, and vice versa. So, absolutely. Most of the time, all you're doing is just just sanity checking the decisions that you make. But it actually saves you a hell of a lot of time. So I couldn't agree more. What I'm trying to do with the group that I'm on, which is a fairly high-profile group in terms of its membership, is make sure that information is then disseminated down to smaller, less well-funded organisations. So that's something I'm working at actively at the moment as a chairman of that group.
Excellent, thank you very much. On the JISC mail lists, I quite often get people asking a question. We get a bit of kind of peer banter going on. And generally you get, sometimes it may seem like a bit of a silly question, then you get people just saying, you're just kind of ripping into them. And then at the back end you get the private message, I'm so glad he asked that question, because I didn't want to post anything in case people were laughing at me. Funding, that's obviously... Oh, sorry, has anyone got any questions about kind of collaborating before we move on? Are there any... Oh no, we've been very quiet today, aren't we? Friday afternoon, yes, isn't it? Yeah, you want to be down the pub. Funding. Obviously, a hot topic of conversation for most of us at the moment. I'd like to just promote JISC a little bit here. We've just released an info kit on funding and sustainability, if that's of interest to you. Post-it note on my sheet here: costs for small-scale digitisation. I'll put a number out there for you: £10.56. There you go. That was actually a figure arrived at by an audit at English Heritage for a digitisation project, and when they had actually factored in staff salaries, material costs, right the way through, £10.56 per image. So there you go. Think about that. Geoff, have you got anything to say on funding and costing?
Well, funding is a difficult area. I mean, costing, I've got a lot more experience about, in a sense. And, you know, the experience I had of going to have a meeting with Chris Mumby from the TNA last week actually was very interesting. They spend almost the majority of their planning time doing surveys and assays and understanding of the material they're about to digitise, either for themselves or for external partners. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is that costing is always related to time. I remember when I was at Heads, the concept of the full economic costing model was really coming to the front. So it wasn't just so much about, well, how much do your external suppliers charge you? It was about, if you're sitting there checking the work they're doing or managing the project, then how much does the square footage that you occupy actually cost you? And you had to build that into everything and the equivalent time that was being displaced by the work you were doing on a particular project. So time, I think, is really important, and that's where the pilots come in very, very strongly. And actually sitting there with the materials, going through the process of digitising, so you've got realistic time frames for digitising things that you can then factor back into the cost, the per hour cost, or the salaried cost of the individuals that are doing the actual work for you. So I think, you know, costings, when you go to external companies and external organisations, and you have to bear in mind that Heads, that was a lot of the services that we were providing, but thankfully it's not something I'm providing now. But when you go to external organisations, then the prices you get quoted, there tends to be like a standard level. You know, what can often happen is there can be a level, kind of almost an not quite price fixing. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's organised, but there's a sort of a level that you know you have to come in at to win a project in a competitive environment. And what I would always do is reality check that against the time you actually think it's going to take. So I do know that there's a few projects that I've been involved with where the decision was, do we go outsourced, do we go internally? And then the internal costs were significantly lower in some areas of going outsourced, because the prices, frankly, were sort of like, well, this is kind of what we can, you know, you can't blame them. It's the commercial organisations, and I've worked for them. So, you know, but it is, you know, you have to evaluate it very much in terms of that. And there's a lot less funding available now than there was, in a sense. There's still funding out there, but coming back to what Simon said in the second talk today, it's about digitisation as part of something else. It's how digitisation gets integrated. There seems to be very small amounts of funding available for just pure digitisation because it's good. I think that's the most important thing to remember. So it's about integrating it with all the wider aims from my perspective.
Putting a different take on it slightly, if you think about digital preservation, preservation is about being careful with your assets, but one of the ways in which you can be careful with your assets is by managing and controlling your processes. One of the ways in which we've fine-tuned the way that we work with Gooby, the workflow tracking system that we use to process content, is that we've religiously gone through it, taking out mouse clicks. We've already heard time costs money. Taking out mouse clicks, taking out workflow steps saves time. It's being efficient with your processes. Automation is another way of being efficient with your processes. We've got very high levels of automation. I've put 108,000 images into our repository this week, and not one of them has been touched by a human. That's a very cost-effective way of getting content in and of holding that content. So it's a different way of looking at how funding works.
Thank you. We've just been given the heads up on time, so I'm going to have to draw this to a close. But has anyone got any questions at all that they'd like the panel to field before we wrap up for the day? Gentleman in the middle there.
Thanks. Christopher Marston, V&O. I was very struck by something Geoff raised this morning, and Simon as well, about how, as well as coming up with a great idea, you have to be able to measure its success and its impact. And I wonder if anybody on the panel has some examples of projects they've been involved in where we've actually been able to measure the success and the impact.
Simon Tanner's paper on, help me out, what's it called?
The value impact model.
Yes, yeah, it's the place to start with that. It's not a project, but it's a model to look at, and it's a model to build your work around.
Quite often what seems to be happening, quite often what seems to be happening is that measurement ends up having to happen at the end, and that's certainly what happened with Old Bailey. Is that you know, frankly, it took them by surprise a little bit because oh my God, all these sites going down, all this kind of thing. And what they did is they then built into the second stages of the project all the measurement tools. But I think if you can do it at the early stages, then that's good. And you also have to rely upon people filling out the forms, and so you have to try and make it as easy as you possibly can. So quite often measurement is much more about is more than mouse clicks and hit rates and so on and so forth. It's about monitoring the mentions and the use of the content, the citing of it within academic publications and in other areas and how it's used. And I think there's a whole paper that the Old Bailey produced on their impact, and it's much more than kind of like the sort of headline-grabbing figures that I presented to you this morning. It's much more about this is the amount of times it's been used in academic publications, excluding books and including books and all that kind of thing. So if you can integrate within those sorts of, the research rating, actually interestingly, the research ratings model within UK universities, if you can grab yourself a collaborator that's within the higher education sector, that's quite good because they have a lot of mechanisms built in there to measuring how all of their projects are successful, because they use that to increase the ratings and then get more money. So it's even more hardwired into that process than it is into museums, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to stay here for a little bit if anyone wants to come and talk to me about anything at all. Maybe the others will also, but thank you very much indeed.